Right. All right. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Happy Asian Males with our sponsor, water. This is my co-host, Sabo Shin.
Thank you. Hey, everybody.
And I'm Brandon Chin. We're drinking water.
And I'm wearing my sandals and wearing my Asian dad outfit today, as Brandon referred to it.
He was very authoritative and he brought us to have hot pot, so I'm very satisfied with the all-you-can-eat hot pot.
C-Pot in El Camino in San Mateo. All you can eat, $16.99 for lunch. It's a bargain. So
there was a palace in there, like literally like a palace.
What was your description? It's EDM plus all you can eat.
Oh, it was like a rave, but with a hot pot restaurant. They had like, they played Flume, right? They played Flume, and then there was like hot pot on a revolving sushi boat tray.
Yes.
I've never seen that before.
The only downside I think we both agreed on was how far the sauces were.
The sauce was way too far to walk to the table. There's so many precarious moments. It's like you have to hold things like this and then walk. But then like with these weird sauces that have garlic and weird smells all over it. So if you drop it, I had 4 raw eggs. So
yeah, my foot smells like soy sauce and garlic right now, but I'll wash them later.
At least you're wearing sandals though.
Oh yeah.
They knew to give you the bill because you had the sandals on.
I feel like maybe that's why they treated me a little bit better. They're like, this guy's like straight from China or something.
Yeah, they're like, he knows what's up. He's gonna pay for the bill.
He's not like Mr. Man Bun here. Your Caucasianness was showing, I think.
They didn't acknowledge me at this hot pot restaurant. They skipped the refill on the soup. But before we go too tangential on the hot pot, so today we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of privilege, because that's a word that's been kind of tossed around recently, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to do a little word experiment with Sabo. I'm going to give him 3 words, and he's just going to tell his reaction to it.
Yes. So are we going to start with that, or are we going to talk a little bit about privilege and how we're going to frame it first?
Let's talk about privilege and how we're going to frame it, just so we have a working definition,
Okay.
a shared meaning.
Yep. Well, this has become kind of a hot topic for me because I used the word privilege earlier this week, and I had a bunch of people kind of jump down my throat explaining to me that...
Like how? Like
yeah, that'd probably be good. So I was trying to think of a motivational post that would also drive some sort of like user engagement with what I was saying. So what I was really trying to communicate was your success or your lack of success has more to do with the things that you're doing versus outside forces.
I remember that post.
Right.
It has not to do with other people's... Your lack of success does not have to do with other people's privilege.
Right.
You were trying to dissociate those two concepts.
Correct. And I think a lot of people read that and were led to believe that I didn't think privilege existed.
Pitchforks went up right away. Pitchforks.
Exactly. And you know what? Actually, that was kind of the reaction I was looking for, because I wanted to see how people thought about this process. And ultimately, I kind of regret using the word privilege, because I realize, people seem to have like greatly varying definitions of what they think privilege is. And then the second part is, how much privilege do you put on specific groups? Are Caucasian people 30% more privileged than the average
31
minority? Yeah,
31%.
Exactly. And to me, the reason why I wanted to talk about it was because I think until we kind of agree on the definition, people just kind of are at conflicts, because we all kind of look at privilege differently. And the way I was explaining it to Brandon earlier was that for me, there's kind of like socioeconomic privilege, like were you born into a wealthy family. Then there's also kind of like you don't have to be wealthy to be well networked, so you could also be privileged.
Social capital
privilege, right? And then there's also like kind of what I think is the most important, which is intellectual privilege. Is the person, or is the circle that you're in a circle where you are constantly being introduced to new ideas that allow you to expand your consciousness, to become a more confident person, to become a bigger thinker so that you could deal with more kind of dire situations. You know, to me, I argue that is probably the people that do the well or are the most equipped to do well in life are people that had that type of intellectual privilege regardless of socioeconomic.
Right, because we're just talking about an intangible resource, money, bank account money, right? It allows you to exchange this with other people, but how you make that exchange is completely up to your social skills and what the intent is of your intelligence, right? Your application of it.
Right.
So it sounds like what we're getting at here is that with intellectual privilege, it's like we're talking about maybe advantages of the mind, or maybe the way you process information. Like if maybe a dad is sitting with his son or daughter and says, like, they're 8 years old, and they say, well, how do you think cars are made? And then the kid's like, well, I don't know. You could give them the easy answer and explain, or be like, well, here's how you would figure that out.
Right.
You know, or how do you do this? How would you even begin to find out? And asking that child, well, like, wouldn't you consider that like a form of like developing intellectual privilege?
Absolutely.
For example?
And, you know, just to be fair, I would say that intellectual privilege, there's probably a correlation of that with socioeconomic as well as social currency privilege. You know, probably the richer you are, the more access you have to intellectual privilege as well. But, you know, it's not a 100% correlation. You know, you can have lots of influential people come into your life, and I believe there are studies about that looked at generations of families, and typically like a successful generation is followed by a less successful generation that is then followed by a more successful, and it kind of goes up and down.
Undulates, yes.
Correct, and the thesis or the hypothesis behind that was that if you grow up wealthy and then you end up as an adult not super wealthy, you kind of have this idea of like, I came from wealth, I gotta pass these like really strong characteristics to my kid to work hard, and then so you pass these characteristics to your progeny, who then are successful, but then they remembered that when they were growing up how they were like struggling, and they don't want their kids to go through that struggle, so they kind of spoil them. So you kind of see this up and down cycle, and that's why, I mean, like for me, I do think privilege is a tangible thing. You know, I do think it's the difference between being born on first, second, and third, and then eventually scoring. You know, like if you're born on third, it's easier to score than if you have to start from home base, right?
Right, like an immigrant who has no social connections except for their one relative who works at, you know, some basic software job. They're not going to have a huge advantage coming into this country, whereas someone who has like a whole family who's established for an entire generation, there's like, oh, I'm bringing my nephew over from Hong Kong, let's give him a shot at getting a job.
Exactly. So I definitely don't want to discount that aspect, but I'm more kind of really trying to encourage more like self-accountability and like free will, right? It's not such a deterministic world that we live in that if you are a certain color, you're just fucked for life, you know? Like, because we've all seen people of color be very successful, and we've all seen the privileged Caucasian people have not successful members of their group. So, you know, I always think like when we talk about this, people always go through the extremes of outliers, like, well, if you were born in this third world country, and it's like, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the vast majority of people that you and I know every day that kind of grew up in middle class families that are now going into work. Some people that are persons of color will, I'm not saying all, but some of them will look at their lack of success, and because they can't be objective with themselves and what they're doing or not doing, the easiest thing is to kind of pass the buck into, well, I'm in a system that is harder for me to be successful, so I can use that as kind of like the scapegoat as to why I'm not successful. And what I'm just trying to say is, yes, you know, some people have a 10-meter head start, some people have a 30-meter head start, and you have to run a 100-meter race, but, you know, there's still the possibility of catching them. And to me, that's a much more hopeful kind of vantage point to look at things than to think about how things could be predetermined for you.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So just kind of like pinging off what you're saying, like let's go into, like, I want to ask you, what do you think leads to intellectual advantages? Like, what is an intellectual advantage? What's an example of that?
So this is a great question. So, and I'm not an expert in this area, but the Greeks had two types of educational systems. One that every single person went through, and another set that that was kind of designed for the aristocrats. So it does go into like privilege again.
So specialty and compulsory education.
Yes. So the first set, and I can't remember what they call these two classes, but the first set they taught you what you needed to know. You know, like how to do basic math, how to do basic reading and writing, you know, all the historical facts that a regular person should know, you know, in order
arithmetic, alphabet, history, basic shit.
Yeah, and then the next phase of education that the elite got to do had more to do with how to learn as opposed to what to learn. So
that
this
sounds
is
a lot like business school, like MBAs, like.
Well, yeah, and I mean,
you have at least the intent behind it, right?
Correct. So, and I wouldn't just say MBAs, but any study of anything,
surgery, something like that.
So, like philosophy, biology, like
yes,
you know, there's all kind of like a certain framework for how do you discover the unknown, right? And unless you understand that framework, then it would be hard to learn new things. So for someone like me, what I fundamentally kind of figured out for myself, especially with the advent of the internet, is I have this great resource called Google and YouTube at my fingertips. Stuff that I don't know, I could just type, read about, or watch a video. You know, so that's kind of been my way of leveraging the how to learn portion. You know, but I remember, like, luckily when I was younger, you know, my family, we didn't grow up. Like, my family is, I would say, upper middle class now, but growing up, we were poor. We lived in, like, the south side of San Jose. We always had to move because my parents' businesses failed, and, but, you know, I think just being around a lot of entrepreneurs that were always just talking about, like overcoming challenges, working harder than other people, when they're resting, you work, you know, like, all those things, like, I think, you know, regardless if we had money or not, like, I was just like, all right, this is what I need to do to get ahead. And even though I didn't have the other building blocks of how to execute on that, I knew that a high level of effort was required to be successful. And I think, you know, we all probably know that through watching TV or just listening to athletes talk on TV, like Hogan, you know, work hard, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, you know, all that good shit. But, you know, when we have someone that we know personally that, you know, seems like they're doing pretty well in life and they tell you those things, you know, I think that is like, you know, that type of influence is super powerful, you know, and that doesn't necessarily require a certain level of money or a certain level of networking. You know, it's just about people trading information. And, you know, we already talked about this information is probably more prevalent in richer, more well-educated groups, but it's not exclusive to them. And, you know,
it's their ability to learn and apply and incorporate this information in a reasonable way, or maybe and it just apply it, period.
Right.
You know, I'm just going to take a venture here and just say, like, you know, okay, guys who trade in the stock market. For most people, that doesn't make sense. The stock market doesn't, there's all these jumbling jargon words, but then if they have some kind of, like, you know, these traders have a bit of information, they're just one step ahead of people, then they're going to take advantage of that. Or they're going to try their best to.
Yes.
Right? But it's not only that, it's like, how do you apply that information? It's a mindset that we're trying to, it sounds like we're trying to flesh out. Like, it's an intangible thing, a mindset.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is so necessary to be able to look at your own mindset and say, yes, I have one. What is it, though?
Yeah.
And it's hard because that requires outside input, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions I almost want to ask people now when I meet them to kind of get a good idea of how they look at life is, how much of your life is deterministic and how much of it is free will? You know, I believe for me, it's about 90% free will and 10% deterministic. you know, and I'm curious how other people feel, you know, and maybe because I'm successful, I feel like free will is super like prevalent in my life, but you know, I mean, just knowing like where I came from to where I am now, like I really do feel it's kind of like the underdog story. You know, my parents came to America, they were poor, my dad failed at many other businesses, I was like the smallest kid in class, always got bullied, fought back a lot, was trying to figure out like how to make something of myself, you know? So to me, I feel like I intrinsically understand what it feels like to have the odds stacked against you. And then after being exposed to some of these ideas, it's like, I don't think I'm anything special. It's like if some other people could get this framework and kind of understand that like hard work and perseverance like trumps a lot of stuff, and being really objective about what works and what doesn't work, and not placing blame on external things to justify why you weren't successful. You know, these are all like really great building blocks to be successful at anything that you do. Not just in business, but just, you know, in relationships, in your hobbies. And, you know, I just really fear that a lot of people quite often will think of life as free will when they're successful, and then go into a deterministic view when they're not successful. So they get all the glory.
When they're losing, it's the odds were fixed. You know, it was stacked against me. But when you win, it wasn't stacked again. It was meant to be.
Yeah.
You know, like,
exactly.
Or you know, I want to kind of relay or like talk about how your story is a response to your environment, right? Like, and I know I go back to Genghis Khan a lot, but Genghis Khan was kidnapped at least twice before his, 12th birthday. That means literally kidnapped and has to live in this neighboring tribe that has no care for him. And that he became so famous and so well off because of how he used his resources. He was a scrapper, but his children were huge drunkards because he had amassed all of this wealth and this empire, and then they had no reason to do any of this. They were the successful Mongols, so they just were literal drunks, and it caused a huge problem. And that's so much that the women, actually, the secret history of the Mongol queens, they had to take over for these drunkard sons. Because the environment that Genghis Khan grew up in was so dire. Like kidnapping, and he had to kill his own older brother because his older brother was such a dick. I'm not saying he had to, he chose to. And that led him to be the oldest in line for his tribe. So just studying that, it's like environmental factors have a huge, like the situation, right, is a response.
It's huge, yeah. I mean, as a father, my goal is to give my kids a privileged life. That's my goal. But I mean, I'm super aware that like when people don't have to work hard for something and they're given power without having to earn it, then you just have people that I think abuse that power because they didn't earn that power. And I believe that, I mean, this is the example we were using at lunch, is I think a lot of people think like if you're privileged, whether white privilege, Asian privilege, whatever privilege, is that there's an automatic privilege machine that you go into and you come out of it with the white collar, 6-figure, 2 kids, white picket fence life. And it's just like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Life, right? So I think here's the number one difference between like an intellectual privilege is one frame of mind believes that if I do X, Y, and Z, this will lead me to a problem-free life. That's not really going to happen. But the intellectual privileged mind understands if I do X, Y, and Z, I will have a better problem to deal with that is maybe more complex and stimulating, but is less dire. Not problem-free, but you still have a problem.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Like,
that makes total sense, and I think that
not the denial of problems, which is the determinant. Oh well, this shouldn't have gone wrong. It's like, no, shit will always go wrong. Murphy's law is real.
Yeah.
It will always. But how do you deal with it? It's like, meh.
And in a weird way, I would say it's probably less dire to like the survival of you, but more dire in an intellectual way, meaning like, okay, it's been a long time since I've been worried about like, do I have enough money to pay my mortgage, right?
Yes.
But I have this different type of stress, which is, okay, if this company doesn't do well, like, my family's not going to be out on the street, but 6 years of my focus just went down the drain. That's like a different type of like pain, you know, like, and I'm not trying to say like one is worse than the other, because one is obviously like based on your survival, but it's the understanding that no matter where you are in life, you're always going to have difficulties and challenges that you have to overcome. And if you have a healthy view on that, and that each of these challenges allows you to level up and become a more complete person, to see things through different lenses, to become more empathetic and sympathetic to people, then I believe that's like a very empowering life, and one that's worth living.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna tell the story about how like I actually came from my mom, who developed she came from like our grandparents gave birth to their first 2 children in an attic in Chinatown. Now my mom lives in San Mateo in a house that's worth close to $1 million. So it was my mom that really came up in the game, and she had a hard time passing that mentality down to me, because I grew up, now that I think about it, like I didn't have to worry about being in debt all the time, but I didn't develop a lot of the habits of a scrapper because of this. I was a late bloomer, as we talked about at lunch.
Yep, I was a late bloomer too, you know.
We relate on that level, because we're like, you know, like, damn, like, we don't see, we kind of like want to naturally be the opposite of our parents, just psychologically. That's part of individuation. You don't want to be a fuck authority, but we don't ever look at the good things that our parents have, and yes, we focus on the things that we didn't get. But as you mature, you're like, oh, maybe my mom's way of doing things was helpful. Like, she'd always tell me like things like, oh, you should definitely follow up with that person. I'm like, fuck that nonsense. What the fuck does that mean? Follow up? Fuck that, Mom. You know, like, but now I'm like, no, that makes sense. Follow up in less than 48 hours with something like, can we meet again?
Yeah,
like,
I like care.
Right. And that basic show, there's so much power in that, but if we don't understand like not having that, I understand the results of not having that. That was being broke for most of my 20s.
Yeah.
Right? Because I didn't follow those things, and I was like, I rationalized like, oh, well, I should, immediately when I got to college, right, I had an entitlement. I was like, I've got this degree in philosophy, no one can deny me like whatever job I want. I'm gonna go get the world. I ended up doing basic clerical work at, this marketing firm in San Francisco. And I was like, fuck this nonsense. This is way below my pay grade. That was just my ego saying, you have not developed any of these habits. This is what they think you're suitable for, is basic bitch shit.
Yeah. And the truth of it is, every 21-year-old or recent college grad needs to start with that basic shit, because almost everything you learn is, if it's business, it's like business theory, right? So you're not really like
high level
running a business or anything like that. So yeah.
Oh no.
No, we good.
Okay.
We good. This is just the monitor, so all of everything's still recording. So.
Well, did your phone crack?
Oh no. Phone's good.
Okay.
Phone's good. What was kind of interesting was I feel like the word late bloomer is kind of like a nice way to say kind of like just fucking up. You're kind of like a directionless fuck up, but I also think that's also the beauty. It's like
it juices up your story so much better, when you have some kind of like really bad spot to talk about.
And I also think kind of like this aimless meandering, it does kind of identify. It also kind of identifies what you like and what you don't like, and your own personality to you too.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, like the medicine that we least want is what we need the most. And so repetitive tasks drove me insane. I needed intellectual novelty. That's what philosophy was so amazing to me, because there was always something to think about, right? But then when it comes down to the doing and the basic shit in life, you have to make sure you're fed, you make sure you're well slept, and taking care of your like basic shelter needs. And even in college, I didn't even know how to really take care of it. I barely met those minimums, so I didn't die. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
when you
yeah.
have to now do that for yourself as an adult, that occupies more room. You have to do repetitive tasks. That's just how it
Yeah,
goes.
that's why it's called work.
It's work, right?
Yeah.
And that was a huge hit to my ego, which is like, you're built for these amazing worldly problems. Like, but first you gotta make your bed. First
Exactly.
you gotta make yourself a fucking sandwich or rice or whatever. And that was a huge lesson that weightlifting taught me. It's so goddamn repetitive, but it's about the process, not the outcome.
Yeah.
I know it's so cliche, right? But you know, like.
It is. I mean, I think the outcome, we're too much of an outcome-focused world. You know, I mean, I always want, like, the best outcome, but, you know, the process is where all the learning takes place. And, man, you said something earlier that really caught my attention. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I'm trying to think what did it have to do with... Wait, run back some of the things that you just talked about in the last 5 minutes or so.
Oh, I was talking about doing repetitive tasks and taking a hit to my ego, having this entitlement coming out of college.
Oh, right.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it. So, yeah, you know, I think that's one of the interesting things about, I think really smart college students is that they could conceptually understand a lot of this stuff, but the life experience isn't there to really make these theories like really concrete, you know. And I think it's like now, you know, now that I'm like twice the age of a college grad, you know, it's easy for me to kind of see, okay, when someone comes in with this type of attitude, it's just because it kind of goes back to, it's like, how much power do you give someone before they earn it, right? So you kind of go into like this entry-level job thinking like you deserve all this stuff, when you really haven't paid your dues. All you've really done is kind of follow orders for the first 21 years of your life.
Yes.
And now you kind of have to be following orders and be somewhat autonomous. And if we bring it all back to like what we were talking about the sense of privilege, you know, like what you learned versus what your half-siblings have learned, you know, like it gets really dicey when you talk about privilege, because we could even see within families, you know, not just within the globe, but within families.
So you're talking about like within the hierarchy of a family.
Yeah.
Within
Like,
siblings.
oldest typically gets the most privilege, right? Like they get stuff passed down to them.
Right, directly from the parents.
Correct. Or it could be the inverse, like the youngest just gets super babied, like, you know, your youngest, right?
Yeah. And I also find too that two things happen that are common, like with the youngest, they'll learn from the fuck ups of the oldest so that they can skate by and almost like economize how much trouble they get into.
Yeah.
Because they know, they're just like, if they did that, all I have to do is avoid this and that.
Right.
So in other words, it kind of enables that kind of natural, what we would call cheating, but it's more, I would say, economizing of effort.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, why bother?
Yeah.
You know, that can lead one way and the other is just like, oh shit, this is fucked. I have to scrap.
Yeah, so in a weird way, you could also argue, you could also argue that the youngest had the privilege of watching the older two make mistakes.
That could be.
Right.
It could be, yeah.
So I think, you know, now that we've talked it through, I think it's really kind of helped me solidify, like, the position in my own head, which is, yeah, it is an even playing field. Some people have more privilege, some people have less. But it's how you take advantage of your resources, ultimately,
Yeah.
that plays the biggest role in